Hi, my name is Cassie and I'm the founder of CQ Studio based here in London. We are a regenerative textiles lab focused on working with natural materials and waste products to design innovative fabrics for fashion. Today we're going to guide you through the process for the Wool4School competition. We're going to go through inspiration, experimentation, design development and your concept. So onto your second board, and this is about design development, and this stage is really about experimentation. So what you want to do is you've refined down some of those ideas and start to sketch. Really, you can't do enough sketching, and you want to start to think about the style of sketching that you want to do. Is it more anatomical and really refined fine line work? Or you can start to experiment with big, large brush strokes and really use the tools that you have around you to mark make and start to think and expand the applications of what this design may be. Using watercolours if you've got access to some, and start to think about how you're taking that inspiration from what you've found and applying it now in a design context. You're starting to think about the colours that you may be using, the textures that you may be creating, but also maybe the print or textile design that you may make. So you don't have to make the actual textile, but you can draw and design what that may look like. This could include embroidery, knit, weave, different textures of the actual material in itself, print on top of it, as well as natural dyes. So if you don't feel that strong at drawing or sketching, you can use some things that you've collected. So here we've got some leaves of a weed from my garden. And really you can just start to place things and start to sketch around these things, or use this as a print design. Take a photograph of this, play around with the scale, the composition, and see what comes to mind. Here as well are some flowers that are used as a dye source, but you can also start to incorporate these in. Remember, your print design doesn't have to be a sketch drawing. It can be a photograph if that's something that you want to incorporate into your design and the story that you're telling. Here as well are some seeds for flowers that are used for dyeing. They could also be built into the print design that you create, or the textile, or whatever it may be. But start to think about actually using some of these materials, even pressing some of these into paper to actually get a print design that way. Here are some natural dye sources from plants that I've dyed on these fabric, and you can see the variety of colours that you can achieve on wool. Also start to think about maybe the placement of the actual textile, so you can dip dye to create an effect. Make sure you're referencing those images that you've conducted in the research first. This is chlorophyll, this is from leaves, so really vibrant green. Here we've got buckthorn, so really gorgeous mustard. And also think about how these palettes reflect on the season that you've maybe chosen for your product. This is weld, another plant. There's dye sources you can get from a range of different plants, and also the trees and barks. So really start to look and investigate what colours that you can get from nature and how this actually relates to the whole process of that product. If you use a natural dye, your product is going to be circular. It's going to be able to go back down into the earth. And when you're using a material like wool, this is really beneficial because it is also a biodegradable material. So here is an example of how you can start to think of how your designs can apply into a form. So I've taken some photographs of flowers, as well as created some print designs from reference images that I've had. And here you can see there's different scales that we're working with. So really start to think about where you're zooming into. Do you want one particular part of that plant to really be blown up in the main feature in your design? And what we've got here is just some straightforward designs. Your designs will be a lot more elaborate than this. But really you can start to see how that design is going to look on your final product, and start to think about the placement, where those colours may be sitting and how that relates to your story. So that's the blown up image. Here is the more detailed image, and you can see how they have a completely different effect. This is a really nice quick way to start thinking and ideating. Take lots of images throughout this process and make sure you make notes as to what it is about each design that you find interesting. As well, you can use photographs. Remember, you can digitally print, so that is definitely an option if you prefer to have a photograph you've taken as part of the feature of your design. And here you can actually start to see the structures that are forming, and it almost completely transforms those botanical images that you initially created. And this is how you start to develop and evolve those images that you've researched. So make sure that you're thinking about you're designing your product, and then you're jumping back to design the textile or the texture, so that you're constantly thinking about the scale and composition of those images that you've got. So here we've got some samples with different examples of experimental, playful wool designs. Here you can see it's a very hand-drawn effect that's been created. And here as well with these florals, it's different examples of how the textile can become and evolve as you experiment and play with your designs. Don't be afraid to make mistakes as you're drawing and playing. Here we've actually got some wool that was from an old jumper that was pulled apart, and you can actually use this yarn to draw with. So you can take the material that you're using, take your reference image and start to draw on paper and start to come up with new ideas. Sometimes in using these processes that feel a bit rudimentary, you can actually come up with some really interesting ideas. Each time you're doing something, really reflect on what that is and what maybe draws you in and what you find interesting. This is how you can really develop your idea to become very unique. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. The part of the design process is really trial and error. So it's about having fun, being playful. If things aren't working, set them aside, but really try to evolve those designs and think outside the box as well. Maybe you can actually use bits of tree bark to mark make with inks, or actually spray over some petals and flowers that you found in the local park. So really try to think of different ways that you can create your design and your form. At this stage, it's not about having a refined design product. It's really about experimenting and trying out new things. So at this stage, you really want to start to think about the different types of weights of wool that exist. This is really lightweight, almost like suiting material, as well as these, textured surfaces, and how this can relate to your design and your inspiration. Sketch these into those drawings as you're making them, just to start to really think about the different types of textures that wool can have, as well as starting to consider how you're beginning to group your colour palette, and really start to sketch that out with just some pencils or pens, and start to play around with how much of each colour that you want in your design as well. Maybe there's just a pop of this pink that can come through based on what inspiration that you've got. And really don't forget that nature is the best designer. Start to look at those structures that you found in those images and how they can translate into your design. Don't limit yourself to think that you just need to apply this fabric as it is. Really start to think of how that can be manipulated to really reflect some of those structures that exist in nature. So what you're doing in this process of looking at nature's processes and structures is called bio-inspired design. This is really looking to nature, looking at the structures that naturally occur and seeing how you can apply them in your design. Sometimes they can have a technical property, and this is something to explore and look at what actually wool can do.